First Class Fatherhood. That is where Alec Lace comes in with his popular podcast.
And one of the most interesting was on a podcast.
Alec Lace interviews high-profile fathers from actors to NFL players with a vision to change the narrative of fatherhood and family life.
Joining me now, First Class Father, Senator Ted Cruz. Welcome to First Class Fatherhood.
Alec, great to be with you. Thanks for having me.
All right, let's start like this. How many kids do you have? How old are they?
I've got 2 kids, 2 daughters. One is 14, and the other just turned 12 last week.
Very cool. Yeah, it took my wife and I 4 tries. We got 3 boys, and finally got the girl to complete the family on our end over here.
Well, well done on that. I will say we don't have boys, but at least with girls there is drama in the house with some regularity.
Yeah, my daughter's 8, so we're finding that out pretty soon here. So if you could take me back then to the beginning of your fatherhood journey then, Senator, how old were you when you first became a dad, and how did that experience change your perspective on life?
Well, I was 37 when Caroline was born, our eldest daughter, and it was something I'd been looking forward to my entire life. I am very close to my dad and both my parents. And Heidi and I had been married 7 years. We decided to wait a little while before having kids, and Caroline was born in 14 years ago, and then 2.5 years later, Catherine came along as our youngest. And the two are as different as 2 people could be. Catherine, the youngest, is a jock. She's into softball and gymnastics and dancing and basketball. Caroline is an actress. She's an actress and singer. She's much more into creative performing, and the two, Catherine's more of an extrovert, Caroline's more of an introvert. And they both have been and remain an incredible journey together.
Yeah, right on with that. Yeah, our 4 kids couldn't be more different as well there. And I know your dad's a first-class father as well. I had the honor of doing an interview with him last year, and he was firing biblical verses at me left and right during our conversation. So I know he's somebody that's very deep into his faith. I know he instilled that in you growing up. How important is faith in as far as bringing up your daughters, and what are some of the top values you hope to instill in them growing up?
Well, I think faith is tremendously important, and I am blessed to have been raised in a Christian home, and we're raising the girls in a Christian home. For me, faith played a part literally in my having a father in the home, which is when I was a little kid, when I was 3 years old, neither of my parents were Christians, and my father was drinking quite a bit, and he left us. He abandoned my mother and me. And we were living up in Calgary in Canada and in the oil and gas business. And my father left and came back to Texas, came back to Houston. And a colleague of his from the oil and gas business invited him to come to church, invited him to Clay Road Baptist Church. And he became a Christian. He gave his life to Jesus. And that transformed his life. And he went and bought an airplane ticket, and he got on a plane, and he flew back to Calgary to my mother and me. And it is literally why I was not raised by a single mother. That friend of my father's invited him to church, and he gave his life to Jesus. My mom subsequently became a Christian as well, and I was raised in a strong Christian household. And now with our girls, that faith is something we try to have as a very important part of the house. I will say one of the great blessings, ironically, of COVID. There were many horrible things about the COVID pandemic and the policies that came out of it. But one of the blessings, at least in our family, was we spent so much more time as a family together. And to be honest, if you were to have prescribed what our family needed more than anything, to literally cancel my entire schedule, cancel Heidi's entire schedule, cancel our kids' entire schedules, and put us all in the house together for months after months after months, you couldn't have imagined actually doing that, but we ended up we would have lunches and dinners together with a regularity we had never had before. We began together as a family, reading the Bible every night and reading through the entire New Testament together, and doing nightly devotions, which we had done before, but I will say the pandemic, because we were all physically together and I wasn't off in D.C. and Heidi was not off working, it put us in a position where as a family we could grow a lot closer together, and I'm really grateful for that.
Senator, so many dads that I've interviewed over the last 2 years have testified to that same silver lining that hit all of us during the pandemic. We were able to really focus on what matters. And I'm a recovering alcoholic and addict, like your father there. And I know that's a huge deal with so many young dads that are battling with alcoholism, with drug use out there. And a lot of them are estranged from their kids. And thankfully, your father was able to come back into focus. But I harp on this show all the time, Senator, about the fatherless crisis that we do have going on in our country. There's so many kids are growing up without a father in the home. And in my opinion, it's the number one social issue we have. I had Governor DeSantis on the podcast here shortly after he passed the fatherhood bill down in Florida. And I pray to God more states will do that. But what can be done, Senator, from a legislative standpoint here to really attack and start strengthening the nuclear family units in this country again?
Well, I think one of the things we can do is not have public policies in place that tear the family apart, not have, for example, a penalty on marriage, not have tax laws penalize getting married, not have an incentive in our welfare laws for someone being a single mom. The single best predictor of whether a child will be successful in life is whether they're raised in a household by a mom and a dad, by a loving parents. That is the greatest piece that can put you on a path to success. Now, it's not the only way. In my family, we have a number of single moms who were in my family. My sister was a single mom. My cousin was a single mom. My aunt was a single mom. My other aunt was a single mom. And so there are single moms who are strong and are anchors for their kids, but it is much, much better for a kid, if possible, to have a strong mom and dad in their family, and that's something that we need to not have public policies pulling families apart, and we need to also not have a cultural war on families that are tearing down fathers, that are tearing down what it means to be a father. I think the family should be central in decision making. We see battles right now in elections across the country where there are politicians who argue that it is the school board and the schools who get to decide what's taught to the kids, not the parents. And I think the parents should have the primary role of making the decisions for their kids about how to raise them and what they should be taught.
I couldn't agree more, Senator. And I always make the stipulation to say it's never to take anything away from single moms that are working miracles out there. And many single moms say, hey, I don't need a man in my life. And that may be true, but your children do. And that's why having a father figure, I mean, you were blessed to not only have your father come back, but he brought the Heavenly Father with him. And I think if we could get the Heavenly Father back in our society, that 1-2 punch of having a father figure and the Lord back in our life, man, I think 90% of the issues we're seeing across the country would evaporate pretty quickly here. And you mentioned there too, obviously, I'm going to put this out here on Election Day. Midterms are all the talk right now. And just as a father of 4 with 6 mouths to feed, the number one issue for me, I'm a railroad mechanic. I've been doing that for more than 2 decades. And the bill at the grocery store is as our press secretary would say, top of mind when I'm thinking about the midterms here, and it's the number one issue for me. You've just been traveling the country, talking to all these different constituents, all these voters. What is the parents' number one concern? What are you hearing over and over again on the road out there from these different states? What are the parents concerned about with this midterm election?
Well, what you're facing is exactly what people are facing all across the country. I've spent the last month on a nationwide 17-state bus tour, and I'm not on the ballot this cycle, so I'm spending all my time helping others and campaigning for candidates for the Senate, for the House, for governorships, and I think this election is going to be a huge change election. I think Republicans are going to retake the majority in both the House and Senate, and if you look nationally at what the top concerns are, the number one concern in the country is what you just cited, inflation, in particular the cost of gas, and that is hurting people as you fill up your truck or your car or your minivan. It's making it harder and harder to make ends meet, whether it's putting food on the table or paying rent or paying your mortgage or paying health care. The cost of everything has gone up. The number 2 concern in the country nationally is crime and the skyrocketing murder rates, carjacking rates. People feel very threatened in their homes, and I think it is a result of misguided policies from Democrats that have undermined police officers, that have sought to defund or abolish the police, from George Soros DAs who are releasing violent criminals into our neighborhoods. And when you release violent criminals into a community, you get more violent crime. And the number 3 issue in the country is illegal immigration and the chaos at our southern border. 4.7 million illegal immigrants have crossed the border illegally under Joe Biden. It is the worst it has ever been in the history of our country. And I think the result of all 3 of those is people are ready to change the course we're on. And I think this election on Tuesday is going to be a major wave election on the order of magnitude of what 2010 was.
Yeah, and even so, one of the things you said there earlier about the school board meeting, and a lot of these school boards want the parents to be out when it comes to the conversation about what should be taught. I'm here in the communist state of New Jersey where they're pushing sexual orientation, gender identity on kindergarten, first and second grade kids. And I have not found a parent yet, Senator, that agrees that adults should be sitting down with kindergartners and talking to them about sexual orientation. I only see these people on TV. I can't imagine that there's parents that are pushing for this. What are you hearing about that topic when you talk to parents around the country?
People are really frustrated by the radicalization of our schools and the garbage that's being taught to kids. You know, you mentioned Florida, and Florida passed a bill that was widely characterized in the press as the Don't Say Gay bill. What the bill really was, it was the Don't Say Sex bill. For 3rd grade and below, it was don't talk about sex with kindergartners. Now, I don't want teachers talking to kindergartners about sex. Gay sex is straight sex. I want them playing with blocks and learning to count and learning reading and writing. And it is a bizarre shift that you've got these radical partisans that believe their job is to indoctrinate kids. You know, I've got a brand new book that just came out called Justice Corrupted, How the Left Has Weaponized the Legal System. And the book begins actually on exactly this topic. It begins in Loudoun County, Virginia. And in Loudoun County, Virginia, as you know, there was a young girl, a 15-year-old girl, who was sexually assaulted in the bathroom, in the girls' bathroom at school, by a boy wearing a skirt. And the school, because they put politics and ideology above caring for their students, denied it happened, pretended it never occurred. In fact, they transferred the assailant to another school, and that boy proceeded to sexually assault another little girl. Well, at the school board meeting, the parents went, and they were understandably very upset. And the school board insisted, no, it has never happened. No boy in a skirt has ever assaulted a girl at any of our schools. And the father stood up and said, look, my daughter was raped at your school, and you're lying about it and covering it up. And their response was to throw him to the ground, to handcuff him, to arrest the father for standing up for his daughter. And subsequent to that, Joe Biden's Attorney General, Merrick Garland, sent a formal memo to the FBI directing the FBI to target parents, target moms and dads who speak up at school boards as domestic terrorists, to use the Patriot Act to go after parents speaking up at school boards. It is an abuse of power, and it's what my new book, Justice Corrupted, talks about, is how this administration and the Obama administration before it politicized and weaponized the Department of Justice and the FBI and the IRS, and they're using it to attack their political enemies.
Yeah, and I remember the story, Senator, and I think all dads' hearts across the country went out to that father. I can't imagine being in his shoes. I know in your book, Justice Corrupted, you also have a chapter. I just have a copy of it here myself, and I know you have a chapter focused on critical race theory, and I know much of that has to do with the Supreme Court Justice Brown, who was the first black woman confirmed to the Supreme Court, despite not even knowing what a woman is. But a part of this critical race theory is another thing that's being forced to these kids in the lower grade school level, where they're telling you one race is superior to the other race and one is a victim. And it's like, I cannot imagine parents anywhere wanting this to be just pushed onto their kids with this type of ideology.
Well, Alec, that's exactly right. So in the book, Justice Corrupted, I walk people through where critical race theory came from. A lot of folks are like, okay, where did this nonsense, like what was the source of it? And unfortunately, the source of it was the school that I went to law school, Harvard Law School, and actually the new Supreme Court Justice, Ketanji Brown Jackson, was a year behind me in law school. And so we were both on the law review together. We knew each other at the time. And where critical race theory came from is it is explicitly Marxist. And if you look at what Karl Marx, the father of communism, wrote, he divided the world on socioeconomic grounds. And he said that there's an irreconcilable conflict between the owners of capital and the workers. And the only solution is to have a revolution of the workers, a revolution of the proletariat, to overthrow the owners of capital and to forcibly redistribute wealth across the socioeconomic classes. Well, what critical race theory did is it was a series of Marxist professors at Harvard Law School that shifted it and used the same frame, but instead of dividing us based on socioeconomic lines, they divide us based on race. And what they argue is that America is fundamentally and irredeemably racist, that all white people are racist, and that every dispute in America is a dispute between the races, and the only solution is not equality, is not treating people fairly and equally regardless of their race, but rather what they call equity. And equity is a code word for actively discriminating against the people they don't like, and for teaching kids, and they've infiltrated the classrooms where they teach kids that they teach white kids that you have white privilege and you're an oppressor. They teach black kids you're a victim. Those are lies. They are corrosive lies. They set us against each other. And the book Justice Corrupted, I walk through the teachings that they're pouring into the kids and just how poisonous it is. And part of the purpose of that is to arm parents to go to your school board and to stop this garbage from being taught to our kids, because it is enormously, enormously harmful.
Yeah, well said. Yeah, Justice Corrupted. I'm going to put the link to the book in the description of this podcast episode so my listeners can get out there and listen to it. Let me bring it back to you as a dad for a second here, Senator. Tell me what you enjoy most about being a girl dad.
Well, lots of things, but I will tell you a particularly wonderful aspect is actually we're in the baseball season, and my youngest daughter, Catherine, I told you she's a softball player. And in 2017, the Houston Astros went to the World Series, and I took her to Game 5 of the World Series. And that was the game, if you remember, that went till 1:30 in the morning. And it was the day after Catherine's 8th birthday. And the two of us went together, and that was an amazing, we were dancing and celebrating. And I told her then, I said, Catherine, you don't fully appreciate this now, but you will tell your grandkids you were here tonight because you just witnessed the greatest game in Houston Astros history. And that started in 2017, and it's been an amazing run where the Astros have been in the ALCS 6 years in a row. And so I've taken Catherine every year, and it's become a daddy-daughter thing that she and I go together. And so we're going to go to Game 6 of the World Series on Saturday with the Phillies, and it's become, she's now 12, and we've done this journey together, and I don't know that there's anything I enjoy more than celebrating at a baseball game with Catherine.
Yeah, right on. I love that, Senator. And it's another thing that drives me nuts in this country is it seems like patriotism has become so looked down upon by so many people in our country. And I know when I spoke to your dad last year, obviously so proud of everything that you've accomplished. We were talking about in high school, you were part of the Free Enterprise Institute, that you memorized the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence. You were given something like 80 speeches throughout your high school career. Is this something that your daughters have gotten into? Are they following in the footsteps? How do you go about teaching your kids about patriotism, and is it something that they're very much into as well?
You know, it's something certainly that they've grown up with. I will say it is hard with a dad in politics. My girls were 2 and 4 when I was elected, and so they've lived their whole lives in the public eye. That's really hard for a kid, and it's frankly, Alec, the worst part of serving in public office. If I could eliminate one part of it, that's what it would be, because they didn't make an affirmative choice to do this. I did, but they didn't have a vote in the matter, and it's difficult for a 12-year-old or 14-year-old that when you go in and you meet other kids, that all of the bitterness and nastiness of politics that's playing out in our country broadly gets projected on kids, and kids can be mean, and it's that component is really tough. So they've grown up doing it. Like, for example, both of them went to every presidential debate in 2016. and they would sit on Melania Trump's lap during the debates. I mean, they would lay on the floor in the room while we were doing debate prep sessions. They've been to all 50 states campaigning, so they've seen a different world. But it's also, if there were anything I could protect them from, it would be having to have the ugliness of politics in today's world thrust upon them.
Yeah, no doubt about that. It's a vicious cycle. It's just right now, I think it's never been at this level. I don't think in our history. It's just so terrible. But I'm running up against the clock here, Senator. Last thing I want to hit you with. I'd love to ask all the dads that I get on the podcast, what type of advice do you have for that new dad or for that about to be father who's out there listening?
I would say almost all kids spell love as a 4-letter word, Time. And there is no substitute for just spending time with your kids. And it's hard to do, trying to make it personal, real, trying to find something that just you're doing with them. And I'd say related to that, remember, it's not about you. It is about their joys and their passions. And that's hard to do. Kids are, kids can be all over the place, but it is, there's nothing in life more important or more rewarding than raising a kid and loving a kid. And, you were talking about as a Christian, look, as fathers, we are instructed by the word to reflect God's love for us in how we love our kids. And that's, you want to talk about an awesome responsibility to interact with your children with the same love and care and wisdom that God Almighty has to all of us as his children. That is, none of us obviously will ever achieve that, but it is an amazing model of love to try to emulate and to try to illustrate to your children.
Very well said. I love the message. This has been an honor for me. I got to say, Senator Ted Cruz, you're a first-class father all the way, and thank you so much for giving me a few minutes of your time here on First Class Fatherhood.
Thank you, Alex. Really appreciate it. Thank you for speaking up for dads, and thank you for speaking up for the kids who desperately need their dads.
You bet. Thank you.
You have been listening to First Class Fatherhood. First Class Fatherhood is a family-made media podcast. Please visit www.firstclassfatherhood.com or www.familymade.com to find out more details. You can order First Class Fatherhood advice and wisdom from high-profile dads on Amazon.com or wherever books are sold. Thank you for listening to today's podcast. Proverbs 22:6 tells us, train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will never depart from it. God bless, and I'll catch you next time.